So it's been a long time since I've done a pinball in a movie presentation. I can't even remember the last pinball in a movie I did. It's been that long. But I wanted to do it because it's a feature that I really enjoyed. I mean, the fact that I get to watch a movie, talk about it with you guys, and then play a table that's based on it. What gets better than that? Pinball in a movie. If you ask me what I enjoy recently, it's been pinball and movies and film. So today I am back with a pinball in a movie presentation on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre film from 1974. So I promised you guys I would do this, and it took me like over a year because I am about to tell you I'm about to give you the perspective and thought on this film from someone who does not watch horror or slasher movies regularly. So I think my perspective will be a little different than someone who watches horror movies daily or watches all sorts of of that genre. So I'm going to give you kind of like a fresh perspective coming from someone who doesn't really watch horror. Because frankly, I don't, ever since I think when I was a kid, I remember this. We watched The Exorcist at one point. I remember us getting scared. And then there was this other movie called I can't remember the name, but I've just never been a horror fan because I don't like getting scared. I like comedy. I like a good rom com, action. But when it comes to straight up horror movies, I am not a fan. Because I'm afraid of jump scares. Like jump scares are not my thing. I can handle some stuff, but something about jump scares really gets to me. But I think if you watch enough horror films, you kind of get used to that, and you kind of can expect it. Is my guess. But now let's talk about this movie, this film. So this is not going to be a super long video, but I just wanted to kind of give you like a basic understanding of this film. So it's a 1974 American horror film by a man named Tobe Hooper. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not sure if it's Hopper or Hooper. And the way this film actually had a hard time getting into theaters because when it released, a lot of theaters kind of like rejected the film. They didn't want it showing. So it was banned in some countries. It was banned in some movie theaters because of how graphic in nature it was at the time, and back in 1974. So you kind of had to put it in context. But it was marketed as being based on true events to attract a larger audience. So, that's where it kind of gets interesting, is that it's not really based on anything real, but it was marketed that way. And it was kind of told in that way. And it doesn't, it's a story that doesn't seem that far fetched when you really think about it. I mean, of course, you have, a lot of the things in this movie, especially towards the end, just seem kind of, in that genre of horror and slasher, where, it doesn't seem like, it could actually happen. But, I think that's why people enjoy horror movies, because it's like something that could happen, I mean, but it's really held in this, its own environment. Another interesting thing I found about this film was the cast were mainly unknown actors, people, but they were from Texas, so that was pretty cool. I think the movie was filmed in Texas as well. So you have homegrown people from Texas, and it was filmed in Texas, which is cool. It also incorporates a lot of the elements of what's known as slasher films, where the use of power tools as weapons that the enemy wields, and usually slasher films also have a masked figure, so you don't see their face, but they're using like these different kind of tools as their weapons. So I found that pretty interesting. That there's kind of like it's a subgenre of slasher, within horror. So let me tell you what I thought about the film. I was very hesitant to watch this, but I wanted to do it because I haven't seen it, and it's basically it's an American cult classic. I mean, the name the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is huge, right, as a franchise because apparently there's sequels and prequels and reboots and comic books, and Leatherface is in video games, and it seems like there's an entire story to be told about this, this weird family that Leatherface is a part of. So, it's just like the way I thought of it was like I had to watch it. I had to, I said, why not, right? Let me see if I can, handle this. And I will say that, this movie wasn't as bad as I had thought as bad as I had imagined in my head. I was imagining far worse. I was far like more graphic scenes, but, it still was pretty graphic for a horror. But when you compare it to maybe some of the horrors released now, some of the horror films released now, it doesn't seem so bad. And, I appreciated that, because what I liked about this, remember, this is coming from someone who doesn't watch horror movies or slasher movies, but the way it was filmed, the cinematography was great. And I think what this movie really excelled on was the subtleties, the use of subtleties. So the film begins slow, right? You hear like a radio talking about what's happened. It kind of really introduces you slowly into this movie, and as the movie progresses, things start getting a lot creepier, right? And that's what I find is good, because really you don't see a lot of the horror stuff until the end of the movie, and so a lot of the beginning is really all in your head. It's kind of setting you up for what's next, and I think that's what a good kind of film does to you. Because the pacing of the film was just great. I mean, there wasn't too many music. It was just like pretty like raw, and an example I would give is when they're going to check out that house with the where you can see the gasoline incinerators and the fuel pumps, right, where Leatherface is. That's that part where you just hear like the mumbling and buzzing of those power tools and machines. Just the noise already tells you something is going to happen, because even if you haven't seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know that it has to do with a chainsaw, and you know what a chainsaw sounds like. But it wasn't, the noises you're hearing aren't chainsaws. You're hearing like incinerator noises, mechanical noises, but it sounds very similar. So this movie was so good at that, really causing the viewer to use their imagination, to kind of hype themselves up. I didn't find a lot of there was a couple spooky parts, couple jump scares, maybe two or three jump scares that kind of threw me off guard, but for the most part it was not that bad. I'm not sure how the other movies are. I haven't seen them. I don't know if I'll be watching them, but as someone who does not like horror, I think that there's a lot to be said of this film, and I can understand why why it became like a cult classic, right? Because just the way it's a horror film, yes, but it's also really filmed well. Just the shots, the scenes, and I think the budget was like, the budget back then, 1974, I feel like, what they say here, like $140,000, but it made, $30.9 million. So it was pretty low budget, and it ended up making a lot of money. So just goes to show you, But I think what's interesting is that when you finish watching this movie, you're left with more questions, and I think it's the kind of horror film that kind of leads itself into, sequels and prequels, because you're wondering, who is Leatherface? Why is this family doing this? What is this weird? What is going on here, right? Why does he have a chainsaw and a leather mask? Why is he, he wears different masks, right? And so it kind of leaves you with more questions. And there was the scene when the teenagers or the people in the beginning start, going on, Leatherface's property to that house, I almost thought in a way, like, I was thinking about how it would feel from the villain side, right? And it almost felt like, because Leatherface and his family are kind of like delusional, they're like, they're like nut jobs, they're crazy. Just felt like when you have, these young adults coming to your house, walking inside, I almost felt for the villain, almost like, why, like, if you were delusional and crazy and then you see these people coming into your house, I don't know, it just seems really weird. But it's just so much that you want to figure out towards the end. You're like, who are these people? Who is Leatherface? What's going on here? The only thing I will say I didn't like was there was a lot of screaming towards the end. I get it, like, but I think it was just overdone a little bit. Like, it could have been toned down. The woman who was screaming was just a little too much. But and apparently that was, some of the things that were controversial about the movie itself. Just that kind of violence there. But yeah, I mean, it would be cool if Stern or some other pinball company made a Texas Chainsaw Massacre table. But I like this one here on Pinball M, and I'm glad I watched it. I don't know if I'm going to watch the other ones, the prequels or sequels or the reboots, because there seems to be a lot. I might, who knows. But yeah, I'm glad I watched the first thing that kind of started it off. And as someone who does not really enjoy horror, I stay away from it as much as I can. I think it's watchable for people like me who are not really into horror. So I hope you guys enjoyed this brief Pinball movie, but I wanted to kind of bring it back, and I promised to do that. So I hope you enjoyed. Till next time, I'll catch you guys later. Take care.